Yeah, no, thank you so much, guys, for having me here. Yeah, as Matt just said, from this season, I can say that I'm a Nike coach, and I have my group here in Italy, Team Air, since the late 2021. My background, I'm a physiotherapist and osteopath, and I have a Master of Science in sports coaching. I been able, luckily, to coach world and Olympic athletes, especially in the sprint, with the peak on coaching sub 10 male sprinter and sub 11 female sprinter. Um, the international experience goes across Europe, United States, and China, where I work first in China in 2019, and then during the 2020 and 2021 season in the United States. And I would like to say that I'm more specialized in acceleration development, max velocity, and the return to sprint. In terms of today's topics, we're going to talk about assisted sprint versus overspeed. Then we will go into the resisted drills for return to sprint, finishing up with the resisted sprinting for the max acceleration potential. I just want to start by defining elite speed. So, of course, we going through phases. We start with the early phase, that is an acceleration. Then we heading into the transition phase, heading into the max velocity and the speed maintenance at the end. I want to start by doing this definition of the difference between assisted and overspeed. Everything that I'm gonna say today is always coming from my previous experience. I need to thanks a lot, especially Randy Huntington, that has been my mentor during the previous years, especially during my experience in China. And so we need to be really careful when we talk about overspeed and assisted speed. In terms of assisted speed, I consider it till when we reach a threshold of the 103% of the max velocity that is possible to achieve by any athletes, any person that can do a sprint at a max velocity. Till 103%, I'm going to consider it as assisted. After the 103% threshold is what I call like overspeed, is what with Randy we've been talking about overspeed. Up to the 103% of the max velocity, there is only a slight increase in the running velocity. The athlete can still maintain a technical organization, and of course the goal is to improve his rhythm, the frequency, and the exposure to the high speed. Once we pass this threshold, we're going into a more, let's call overspeed. So the velocity exceeds the naturally achievable max speed. There is a greater neural and mechanical demand. And over the 103% of max velocity, the supramaximal exposure may impair timely tag repositioning and compromise the optimal segment angles during the maximal velocity phase. There is, of course, a much higher technical and injury risk. The most important difference that we see in here is that once we pass the 103% of the max velocity, let's say that the max velocity, to make it easier, achievable from an athlete is 10 meter per second. If we overpass the 103% of this velocity, we're creating a very difficult setup where the athlete most likely will struggle in repositioning his thighs in the correct position to achieve a max velocity biomechanical profile. So what in the drills we call more like a B action. It will be way more difficult to achieve the correct position of the leg, creating then a consequent overstride and the possibility, of course, in increasing the injury risk. If we're going to see assisted and overspeed, the assisted is supporting the technique and the control and the exposure of high speed, while the overspeed exceed the natural capacity and disrupt mechanics. We need to understand when one is correct to use and when one is correct to use on the other side. In my perspective, with elite sprinters, sometimes I never abuse of overspeed. I'm most likely, and we will talk later how I'm going to use it during my season. I'm always working in the assisted speed. I'm almost never going to the overspeed, because I only try to use the overspeed to break the possibility of an athlete to achieve a certain speed. So if I want to create really a change in the central nervous system, I might go over the 103%. Always taking care of the braking forces that, thanks to 1080, I can get back, and always taking care of the technical run that we having during the max velocity phase. So with video analysis and also the data that the 1080 is giving me back, I'm able to see if the overspeed is actually something still safe to be done. Practical application. So when assisted sprint works best, the ideal scenario is that we working with it during the maximum velocity phases. In my training plan, normally max velocity takes 1 day per week. Actually today on the Wednesday, we can do it with athletes so that they have a stable upright mechanics. Is going to improve the stride frequency and the reactivity, and is preparing especially the exposure to the high speed in competition. I just want to show here a video. Okay, this is like a record of a record of the screen on the 1080 Sprint 2. We having this was a guy, he ran 60 meter, achieving like the speed of 1140 meter per second, and especially running the 60 meter in 666. This was an athlete where his PB was 663. So we actually pulled him in a speed that is similar to his actual PB. We reach a speed that is higher of what is capable to reach, because of course we are starting 2-point, we are not starting from blocks. And so this is what I call like a good assisted repetition. If we go instead in when not to use it, there is high risk situation. For example, an early return to sprint phase, okay, if we use it too early in the return to sprint, can create, of course, high risk in the athletes. Athletes with poor front side mechanics, this is very important. Sometimes, and I see also a lot of video of coaches using assisted or overspeed, the upright mechanics is very important to be done correctly, because if not, the braking forces are too high and we can end up in a very high risk of injury. During high fatigue periods, is better to don't use it, or the risk is very high. We normally, as we will see later, use it only in a very short window of time during our season. Athletes with recent hamstring injury, of course, and a lack of technical consistency at max velocity. If we have athletes that at max velocity, they not consistent, is very high risk to use it. I'm going to show now another video. This is be done same from the guy. This is be done from a lady. We will see later the video. The lady PB in the 60 meter is 717. We've been pulling her during the run with 4.2 kg that create a 60 meter in 683. If we see also the peak velocity, 1101 meter per second, is exceeding a lot the capability of hit female sprinter to achieve that speed. And so this was almost a rep of overspeed. After that, we decreased the load at we were pulling the athlete, because if not, the injury risk was too high. In the Sprint 2, you can't go directly to see the braking forces. You can check it on the web app, or with the Sprint 1 was showing. But during this run, at a check on the web app, the braking forces were too high, and so we were creating a high risk of injury on the athlete. Key programming variables. So here, the variables that matter, of course, the towing force that we're using, the percentage of the velocity that increase, as we said before, the sprint distance, the surface selection. Okay, in my personal experience, I'm only doing the assisted and overspeed, of course, on track, because it's a surface that we're using mainly during our competition. The timing within the session per week, and the total high speed exposure. Then we have, of course, like the monitoring strategies. So we can use for assist the run timing gates, video analysis, step frequency, ground contact times that are given us from other equipment. We're using, for example, Smart Track or Optojump that they're giving us the possibility to check this data, and a real-time velocity tracking. All these together can support the 1080 in letting us understand if the workout we're doing has the correct biomechanic that we need for the athlete. The typical parameters are then a velocity increase between 1 and 3%, distances between 20 and 60, 80 meters. The total volume is very low. As I will say later, the total volume we're doing is very low. Today, for example, with one of my elite female sprinter, we did a full session of assisted. We ran a total volume of 180 meter. I believe it's enough. There is a full recovery between reps, and especially always prioritize quality over quantity. Here we're seeing the second rep of the guy. Where we achieve again a 660 second over the 60 meter. We increase also the top velocity, but again, we were staying in the assisted. Now, as we see, and we will see later in the other video, we're using a pretty high, here we were around 8 to 9% of body weight, pretty high pulling kg. Normally, I tend to use less, especially in elite sprinters, and moving forward, we tend to decrease the load. My idea behind assisted speed in elite sprinting. Of course, we need to take in consideration the effect on the central nervous system. We need to understand if we're using assisted or overspeed, and especially taking care of the braking forces. As I said before, a good way to do possibly overspeed, a good purpose to do actually overspeed can be to put the central nervous system in a situation where it can actually learn how to reach a certain speed. If we have, for example, an athlete that is struggling to reach higher speed, in my own experience, I always work with a 10-meter segment. So, for example, the goal for my elite guys is to reach like split at 0.83, 0.84 in 10-meter flying, with the female around 94 and 95. That is what is giving them the possibility to go sub 11 and sub 10. If I see that they stuck into a certain range of time, let's say I have guys that they are stuck in 0.88 or female that they are stuck in 0.97, I can think about doing a couple of sessions in overspeed to break that habit and to have the central nervous system to learn a certain speed that we want to achieve. Always taking in consideration the braking forces. Braking forces that, based on my experience in China, where I was able to work with Randy and Rolf Hohmann, that is one of the first inventor of 1080, we tend to avoid to exceed 40 to 45 Newton in average on braking forces. And till today are data that I take in consideration. I'm just giving literally, it's not on the presentation, an example of today. We did with this girl like 3 times 60 meter of assisted with 30 meter fly, where we took the split every 10 meter and we measure like the flying 30. Our goal was to reach a flying in 286, and we actually started with like a pretty high load, like was 4.5 kg for an athlete that weigh around 60 kg. And then she was already too fast. So then we decreased the weight, still too fast. We decreased the weight. And at the end, she achieved our goal of 286. Actually, it was a bit faster, 283. The good of that of today run was that her braking forces, they were higher than 45 only in the first rep. The second and third rep, we were having already like Newton that they were below the threshold that I just tell you. And this was giving us the possibility to see also at a video analysis a very good mechanic. So this is our first actual session of the season. As I said here, seems very few, but with the elite athletes I have, I'm only doing a max of 4 sessions per season, and I stop always around 4 weeks before the main event. This is very important to time, and I do only 1 session every 10 days, roughly, depending also on the competition schedule. I tend to don't do too much of assisted and overspeed, because only if there is the need for the athlete to break an habit, I'm then going to use it. Or, of course, the assisted, what is giving us the possibility to do. For example, today we were able to give her, with a rest full of 10 minutes in between, an exposure of 3 times basically the speed she will need to reach at her best level of the season in the 100 meter, 3 times in a single session with a rest of 3 minutes. So of course the 1080 assisted ourselves in reaching that speed and to hold it for 3 times. That normally in competition is not possible, of course, because after a full exposure, even if it was like a full 60, we will need a lot more rest, and of course like this will create a lot more fatigue. Practical application, I'm going to show now some video. The first 2 videos are of the screen I showed before. We were like here in US. We were using like the Freelap to time. I'm just gonna show the athlete. She's been pulled. We were doing the same as I said. So 30 meter of acceleration already pulled, and then 30 meter of fly. That is the area where we really want to work. I normally use a 30-meter acceleration zone because it's giving the athlete the possibility to respect as much as they can their profile on the acceleration. I just want to show this guy. This guy is the one that we've been pulling with 6.5 kg. He's an athlete that is running right now 10.3, 10.2. I think he has the potential to go to a 10.1, 10.2 consistent soon. What was like my cue to him were to keep the thighs up. I always give this information to the athletes, not the knee, but keeping the thighs up. Because from a postural perspective, I think that giving the knees up is putting the center of focus too far, and so the athlete normally tilt back and lean too much backward with the trunk. But the cue that I was giving to the athlete were to keep the thighs up, because of course he was able to reach the speed, but his braking forces were too high. So we actually used within a more as assisted to overspeed, because the speed that he was achieving was of course similar to his PB in the 60 meter, but the top velocity was over his capabilities. Here is in our usual setup here in Padova. We're using like microgate timing gates. Here, an athlete that she's the actual African champs in the 200. She was able to do a rep very good. We started with her to do assisted. Basically, this was the last session before the African champs, so it was roughly a month ago. And we got with her to decrease a lot the weight. She's been pulled only with 3 kg. That was allowing her to basically already be at her top shape with only few kg. So as you can see here, we have different profile, and as coaches, we need to be able to adapt based on the athlete we have in front of us. Now let's go to the second topic, the resisted drills for return to sprint. 1080 gave me a lot of help, especially during the rehabilitation process during the all years. I remember I was using 1080 in China, then I used 1080 in the US where I was assistant coach. And it was the first machine I decided to buy when I came back to Italy, especially because with a physiotherapy background, is giving us the possibility to recover way, way faster. The key advantages are to lower the absolute sprint velocity, of course, so we can work at a low at a low velocity using high force, higher horizontal force orientation. Of course, we reduce the limb cycling of speed. We have a greater technical control and is easier to manage the intensity. The main objective, of course, is to have a sprint-specific force production, the projection mechanics that is being helped. There is a higher tissue tolerance, and we can develop the athlete confidence. And of course, we can use it to get a progressive exposure to velocity. I'm going to show now the drills that I'm using the most during the return to sprint. I'm very attached to the drills. As Italian, I always say in the courses I present, we have a lot of drills. Sometimes we have drills that, for me, they don't even make sense when applied to running biomechanics. I loved at first the drills in the US because they were very simple, apparently. But they were always specific to the activity we were going to do. So they were always very specific on the acceleration or the max velocity. I normally tend to divide the drills into max velocity and acceleration. I normally care a lot about the shape that the athletes are reaching. And I'm using it in the return to sprint because, of course, I can slow them down and I can have truly the athlete work in the activation that I need for that specific drill. I'm going to turn the first one on. This is an A walk. In the A walk, I always care that the athlete is reaching a 90-degree or thighs parallel to the ground. He is not lifting when he's pushing with the support leg. Here we can see like a very good shape for me. There is a push on the support leg. This is a 90-degree, good orientation of the upper arm. And like the foot is neutral, ready to attack the ground. That this is a shape that we're gonna have in the acceleration. Of course, if we imagine, of course, that we have a diagonal trajectory in the acceleration, if we start especially from blocks or from 2-point. This is a very basic one. I normally use it with heavy load, 15 kg normally, isotonic, and over 10, 20 meter. Here we have then back walk. Okay, we're gonna have basically a walk that is replicating the cycle of the run, of course, opposite way. I need the athlete to arrive on toes, then grab the ground and pull back. Also, here is a technical exercise that I'm using for giving the possibility to think about the whole cycle of run in a low speed with high kg and also going in a different direction. So it's also a tiny bit more challenging for the central nervous system. Lateral walk used more as stability exercise. Okay, I care a lot that the athlete is reaching with a flat foot and is pulling on the side. These are very exercises that we can do also in a very early part of the season. We can use it in the preseason. We can use it in a return to sprint early phase. Next one, I usually call this ankling. The athlete, I want him to be able to push down and back to rip the ground. Here I start to decrease the load. So normally we are around 12 to 10% of the body weight. We start to create a movement that goes horizontally. And especially I'm teaching with like a lower exposure on the thighs flexion, the anterior part of the sprint cycle that I call always in like a B movement more. Here, like he's doing it on my side very well, and a run. We can see that he is able to reach like this A figure in front of him. So thighs parallel to the ground, the shin is perpendicular. He's having a neutral foot. He's not in dorsiflexion, either plantiflexion. He's very active. He's creating vertical forces because he's pushing down to the ground, is not lifting. We can see by having the let's say the center of mass going up and down. Good arm action. Of course, he's also creating like an horizontal force production with the help of 1080. We are also here around 20 meter and around the same kind of kg. Last one that I normally use in the protocol for return to sprint is the straight leg run. Here we asking the athlete to keep the leg straight, pull back, don't lift, because mostly they use the hip flexor to lift instead of pulling back the heel. We need to create an horizontal movement by pulling back the heel, and we need to have the hips moving forward because we pull back hard. So we need to have a strong activation of the posterior chain. Here we decrease a tiny bit the load. We go into 6 to 8 max percent of body weight, still isotonic, 20 to 30 meter. And of course, it always depends on the athletes you're working with, if he's able to respect the shape of the movement you want to use. If before going into the next part, I just want to say, in the return to sprint is always important, on my perspective, to understand what do we want to achieve in which phase, and to put down like time frame very carefully. So the 1080 can help us on giving the possibility to slow down a lot of action. We can get the athlete very soon into doing an activity that is way more similar to the one we need at high level sprinting. It's important to respect the timing of the injury, but for sure, an early exposure to drills that are related to sprint is very important. Going into the last part of the presentation, so the resisted sprint for the max acceleration potential, I always want to start with this slide. This slide is took from Ralph Mann. Ralph Mann is been very inspiring. I had the honor to meet him when I was in the US. Like I follow basically all my biomechanic background thanks to him. And it's very important to understand how much is important the acceleration in the total performance of, for example, an 100-meter sprint. In this graph, we see, of course, an elite 100 meters for men. Ralph always divided the start, that I call like the true acceleration, as the first basically 2-3 step. At the first 2-3 step, look how high we are already in percentage of the max V. In a max V, that we need to consider is the max V of elite sprinters. Like to go 12 meters per second, we need split that are around 82, 81 in the 10-meter flying. So we are talking about really elite sprinters. And we need to take in consideration also that sometimes in female sprinters, and that in like also sprinters that or other athletes in other sport, the first 3 steps are kind of the same in percentage, sorry, are kind of the same in speed or achievement of speed, but they have a way different max velocity. So a max velocity of 10.6, 10.8 in women is already a lot, but they able in the first few steps to reach speed that are not too far from this. So actually in a 100-meter sprinter, the first 3 steps that are already like passing the 60% of the max velocity, so they're very important to be developed. In athletes that are not 100-meter male sprinters, they are maybe female elite sprinters, or also athletes in other sports, the first few steps are reaching even higher percentage of their total max velocity. So the importance of working well in this area is greater in all the sport, is a lot in all the sport. Why the resistive sprint matters? Okay, so the acceleration is force dominant. Elite acceleration depends on the horizontal force application. The early steps require high force orientation and a projection ability. And sprint-specific force must be expressed at high velocity. This is very important to what we will see later, especially on the different load that we can use. It's important that we can respect the high velocity during our resisted sprint for the acceleration. There is a lot of time where we put too much load, and I always call them force exercises, but they are not respecting the sprint mechanic, especially the sprint timing. So we're going into a more force exercises for sprint than a resisted sprinting. Resisted sprinting improvement, of course, we have it in horizontal force production, projection mechanics, sheen and trunk angles, early acceleration rhythm, and specific power output. When we talk about load categories, we can divide it then into light resistance. So we have a minimal velocity loss. Sorry for my English today, but after practice is getting worse and worse. Technical emphasis and greater transfer to free sprint mechanics. With moderate resistance, there is a balance, of course, between the force and the velocity, is the most common use range, and it gave a broader acceleration stimulus. Heavy resistance that personally I don't use a lot. It has, of course, the max horizontal force emphasis. There is a greater projection demand and is useful for early acceleration development. Again, similar to the overspeed, the heavy resistance, I believe, is very important, especially when we have athletes that are not developed yet into the elite level. This is very important. When we go into the load prescription, if we prescribe the load based on velocity loss, we have like a 10-20% decrement in the velocity. That is more technical and is a velocity-oriented stimulus. We have then a 20-40% decrement that is a mix between force velocity adaptation. As I said before, this is the most used area. Like even when we use like roughly 10-12% body weight in a resisted sprint, I normally use distances between 20 and 30 meters. The decrease in velocity is actually way higher than what we think. So is very likely to be into 20-40% decrement. The 10-20% decrement is very hard to achieve, and sometimes really we just need a few kg, but when I say few kg, even 1-2 kg are enough to have already this decrement in speed. 40-60% decrement is not something that I use, especially in my practice with elite sprinters. Is more a force dominant acceleration development. And especially we need to use the data. So we can auto-regulate the total reps. We can adjust the load live. We can monitor the fatigue, and we can determine the session quality based on the data we're getting back. We need to identify the optimal acceleration stimulus for that specific session. This is very important. Here I give an example of different kind of acceleration with different athletes. So here we have a back view. We're doing a 4-point start. We were working with a kg that goes around 8-10% body weight. It's important that I normally use the resisted sprint mainly without the blocks. We have a very good results when we use it with blocks, but it's important to start without blocks because the plus of using 1080 is that we can have like the same shape, we can have the same force needed from exit from the blocks already with a 4-point start. And especially training with a 4-point start is teaching the athletes how to use the blocks, while sometimes we tend to put the blocks too early, and then the athlete is not actually able to use the block to push, but is only use the block to position himself, and then normally the action are on lifting instead of pushing. In this case, we were able to respect good timing. We need to understand that is already a 20-30% in velocity loss. Here also we can see from this view, and it's important I put a different view because we can see what happened when a resistance is applied. As you can see in the video, the athletes tend to go on the left. So of course, overcoming a resistance is giving like an issue, and it's important to address. Like our resistance create an issue. Is the same issue present without? Because if it's not present without, it's only appearing when there is a need of overcoming a resistance. So this is very important. And then a side view here with Amy. She's the silver medalist in the 200 last year in Tokyo. 1080 has been very useful to address her acceleration and to have her respecting the correct angles we need to exit in the acceleration. We had also overexposure. So, for example, after using heavy kg on the 1080, we got actually angles in the basically in the first in the block clearance, so from step, let's say 0 to 1, that they were too low, and this was caused like by the use of an heavy resistance. We had to decrease the load to then be able to respect the correct angle. So always understanding that 1080 is giving us a very good equipment and a very good tool for our resisted, return to sprint, assisted, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to use it correctly, because like increasing too much the towing force in the system, increasing too much the kg in the resistance can create a differentiation in the biomechanics that we actually need. It's very important to understand this, and I always recommend to check the video, to see live the video or the data, to understand if actually the resistance or the assistance I'm giving to the athletes is the correct one we need. Also in the sprint drills, because sometimes the sprint drills, we tend to do it with too much kg, and then the drills is not respecting the technicality that we need. There is at the end like a sprint continuum where we need to select the right stimulus at the right time. So as I presented, we have always the possibility to use resisted sprinting, resisted drills, assisted and overspeed sprinting. We can mix them up. For example, the resisted drills is not mandatory to use them only during the return to sprint. We can use even them during our regular season. We can use them to give more a recovery session. We can give them in a technical session to have the athlete focus on certain aspect of the sprint. Resisted sprint, we can use it, of course, in the acceleration development. We can use it, though, also to create fatigue. While the assisted and overspeed, of course, as I said, we need to understand when to use it, why we're using it. Is it overspeed or is assisted? Is an assisted speed but is creating too much braking forces? So this is very important to understand. The key takeaways, assisted and overspeed. Assisted is different from overspeed, so we need to differentiate them. The velocity exposure only works when the mechanics remain stable, and more speed is not always better speed. Nowadays, I see a lot of coaches posting of athletes going very fast, but sometimes they do an overspeed where the technique is not ideal. Where, yes, we create a very big exposure of the central nervous system, but then this exposure comes to a cost. We can't, unfortunately, expose too soon for us in track and field in the season, because if not, the athlete is not able to maintain it during the season. And so it's very important to use a specific time frame in it. The return to sprint exposure must be progressive and controlled. Resisted sprinting allows for a safer reintroduction of the force and projection. The objective is restoring the performance capacity of the athlete. In the resisted sprint, we have, of course, a load prescription that should be individualized. So each athlete need to work to a specific weight, to a specific percentage of body weight, because it depends a lot on the biomechanic that he can produce after we apply the extra force. The velocity decrement is more useful than arbitrary sled weight. So of course, like the possibility that we have in by checking the velocity even live with an 80 is a lot important for people that don't have it, but I suggest to do like check always the velocity and understand how much you have in decrease of the speed. And the real-time data improves the decision making and the quality, of course, of the session. I'm ending with one of the quote of Randy. I know he already told me that it's not his one, but I don't remember who he took it from. So I always said that it's from Randy. Train dog, educate people. Let's don't forget that as coaches, we always need to educate. So sometimes we get stuck into training. I leave you here my contact. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. And now I'm going back to Matt to see if we have time for Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That was a great presentation. I took a bunch of notes. Hands getting a little sore, actually. I learned a lot, being a coach myself since kind of 2020 with the machine, doing assisted and overspeed. So I'm jealous for kind of everyone else who can go apply this tomorrow. But we have a few good questions in the chat. I have a few kind of myself. I got three on kind of overspeed as that was the beginning of the talk. So 103%. Awesome kind of rule of thumb people can kind of take home and see for themselves. But how are you actually getting that 103? Because you could do the top speed in the rep, you could do the time, like your overspeed was like 60 meters. Are you taking their PR, like fly 10 velocity? Are you taking their PR kind of race speed? Kind of how are you actually calculating that 103%?
So basically, what I normally do is this. Of course, we can go with a different option. We can go by the actual speed of the day. That is not an option for myself, unfortunately. So we can have like the athlete run a couple, for example, today we did 3 run of assisted, and before that, of course, we do 2 run without, like to feel the distance, to feel the track, to feel the spikes. We can actually use them time like a segment and say, okay, today you're running, I don't know, 3.0, and we want to go like 103%. So let me see. Okay, so today I want to go like 291. Okay. And this can be like done on the day. We can do it based on their PB. That is something that I also don't use because the PB, there is too much factor in the situation. So I normally go by the goal. Okay, so I take an athlete. What's my goal with him for this season? Okay. And in track and field is very easy. There is a bunch of data out there. You can find actually a database with all the split in the 100 every 10 meter. You can go there, check like the time. You can check like what they were actually flying. So for example, let's say I have my 10.9 girl. I want her to go 10.90 low. So then I know exactly what the flying has to be in the race. Okay. So I know that the flying in the race has to be 290x. And then I do the 103% of that. And I get off with 286, like for example, today. And then I start the session based on that. And normally I always do this. Like I take an athlete because I know that when I'm starting to use it, they're going to be ready. So for example, today was actually surprising because like I start with 4.5 kg and I was thinking, okay, let's see what we can get. But she was way, way faster. So I said, let's decrease. And basically she hit the time that I needed with only 2.5 kg. And basically, and she was faster, 283. So probably with 2.2, 2.1 kg, she was already on the pace I need. But I know that she can be because I planned the season, and this is why I'm using only a short like time frame. Then in my sport is very easy. Like you want sub 10 athletes, they need to be able to split at least one or two in the 10 meter of the flying, either the early one, so from 50 to 60 or 60 70 or 70 60 70 70 80. They need to be able to split at least a 83, a 84. If not, they can't go sub 10. So I need them to reach that. And sometimes I had athletes that, look, I had athletes that they were running like 10-3 in June, July, desperate. They didn't like, and I know they could have gone faster, but they were not able to achieve that speed. You do one session, you pull them, you don't care about too much the weight, you have them experience an overspeed. You just need to be careful with the braking forces. And literally, we did with this athlete, he was running 10-3, desperate. He had like in 2 weeks' time, the European champs was there, and like I pulled him very fast. He achieved the time. 2 weeks later, championship record. Like first time, like was around 10. Then the next year, he went sub 10. But was the only way. If not, his mind was not ready to go into that stage. But you need to be really careful. Sometimes people pull, they have like 60, 70 Newton of braking forces. Like can go very well, especially with young athletes, but can go very wrong because if you might hit in the wrong moment, we need to remember that our hamstring and adductors are like a piece of wood. If you hit the right spot, it breaks completely. So, like you can guess, but this is how I work.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's interesting because there is a lot of kind of variation on a daily basis in athletes' kind of performance or ability. You know, they have their 100%, but they could be a little bit down that day, whatever. So you can use the day itself, or you can use kind of work backwards from kind of the goal time. I think that that makes total sense, and that's a good segue into my next question. And fun fact, I had this conversation with Randy a few months ago about the braking force, and I think that that's probably the biggest, most interesting thing people haven't heard of yet. And the idea, and I'll kind of explain my understanding, and then feel free to kind of fill me in. So the idea is when you're doing a resisted run, you know how much force, how much power, how much whatever you are making against the machine. But in overspeed, the machine is telling you how hard it is working to pull you, right? So if you are braking too much, if your mechanics are a little bit suboptimal, if you're creating too much braking forces, then the machine has to work harder to then pull you. So the idea of overspeed is you still want to be running close enough to your kind of natural run. You're not just being yanked down the track. So if the machine is working too hard, the pull is too much because you're not actually running, you're kind of being pulled down the track. And then there's some numbers and thresholds, like you said, 60 to 70 newtons is too high. I know Randy said something that like 35-ish range. So did I do a good explanation? And then what are those kind of guidelines for the amount of newtons or force the machine is kind of pulling the athletes with?
Yeah, normally, like I check again. Like we've been talking with Randy all the time, and we always checking into that range of 40 to 45. I know, and but you can tell, like for us, let's say it's easier because we check in the athletes every day. We see them, so you can tell when an athlete is being dragged down the track. When I see videos sometimes online, I say, "Oh, this guy is being dragged down the track." For us, the braking forces are the important part because you can truly tell if an athlete is like braking and so he's being just dragged or is actually on it. Today was surprising because in the last rep at 283, the braking force was like 27. So it's nothing. So basically, she's already able to run that. And the 1080 gave me the possibility to run it 3 times. If in a regular setup would be impossible. And this is like the most important. And then, of course, you check the video, you need to understand what you want. Okay, so is the ties in the right position or not? That's the most important. Once you pass a limit, the action of the ties coming through is not fast enough and the ties is not going to be parallel. So then it's going to be like too low and the action of pulling back the shin and the foot is not happening. And so it's too low and we're braking. and then of course the newtons goes up. But you don't need to watch, even if you're using the sprint shoe and you don't have the web up like straight up, like you just need to watch and see the video and understand, is the mechanics I want, or is a mechanic that is not making sense? Also, what I want to say, you need to have the right athlete. Like if you pull me at 8 kg, I'm never going to go 12 meters per second. I break before. Like you need to be able to achieve that speed. So if you need to break the habit, you can go in overspeed. Just be careful because, today at the first rep, we got 48 Newton, was almost there. Do I want to pull her 3 times there, going to 70? That is way too fast because it's giving me split of 0.90 and 0.89 that no women on earth ever done it. Nah, it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Do you want to do it because we have an athlete that is running 11.3 and her potential is actually to go like 10.5? Maybe. But I'm not seeing like that as a smart decision.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that that is just one more kind of piece to the puzzle to support you as a coach. And obviously, no one is just coaching and staring at the tablet the whole time, or at least I hope not. Like you could tell when an athlete is being pulled out of the mechanics that you want and kind of things like that. But that helps you as a coach. Oh man, we're at that limit. Do I really want to go again, or should I drop it down? Or oh wow, this athlete is actually running way better than I thought. The Newtons is kind of way lower. So it's just one more kind of piece, but it's a different way to think about it. Like how much is the machine working, or basically how much are they actually kind of running themselves? So I thought that that's a super interesting thing that people can kind of dive
And
into.
also in the resisted, I always tell the athletes, especially because in the resisted you can see also, no,
Mhm.
if you want, you can actually become uh, good in like beating the 1080. So I always say, don't fight against the machine. Like you don't need to win against the machine. The machine is gonna win. The machine is helping you to do an exercise. Because if I do resisted and I measure the first 30 meter, and an athlete doesn't want to drive and stay low, and he's gonna do like one step and then stand up and just run as much as he can, he's gonna run the fastest time on the field. But it's not what I want to do. Like, so I need to check the data, but I also need to understand, is it all respected or not? Like, is my biomechanical idea being respected or not? So I always say, don't try to beat the machine. Let the machine help you. Even in the resisted, let the machine help you. She is helping you because my 1080 are all ladies. So so I always say like, let them help you. Like she's helping you. Like don't fight because if not, you're not gonna achieve like what is necessary.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination of how the athlete is running mechanically, how they're feeling that day, how you think they look, from your coach's eye, plus what is the load, what is the distance, what is the braking forces, where a lot of it is putting it all together and is this the right stimulus for today? Should I add, remove, or kind of modify? So super kind of interesting perspective. And I got two questions from the audience, and then I think that that'll be kind of all we have time for. So first is with your kind of velocity decrements. How are you getting are you running a full load velocity profile, or are you doing like a best run of the day? And then along with load velocity, have you kind of dove into force velocity, and are you using any of those numbers in your programming?
Um, so normally in the resisted, I tend to do a post analysis. So what I normally do is I just put down like the machine, I have the athletes run. I try to understand what is happening with the machine. So, okay, the resistance we put down is creating him to come up with the trunk, or he's creating like an overflexion of the thighs and then a land as a flat foot. He's creating this. And then, like, when I see that they doing actually well, I'm asking, like, what was the top speed? Like, what was the time? Okay, top speed especially. Like, is the top speed like good in terms of is top speed like where is it? like is actually like over, I don't know, over 30 meter at 10% body weight. Normally what we got 7.8, 8.0 with the women. So okay, where we at? Because now the shape looks good. Like where we at? We actually are at 8.0. Okay, too fast. Let's increase the weight. Okay, and then you can play with that. And then after you can check the data and understand the velocity decrease you had, because um, is not easy to get actually the velocity decrease based on your ideal profile, because your ideal profile is based on, again, competition blocks 0-30 with the gun. So you have sometimes that you need to take off the gun reaction. Like it's not easy, like takes time, take a lot of in my side Excel spreadsheet like that I need to go through. So like on the resisted, I do like a post analysis instead of like actual like live analysis.
Fantastic. So last question. Whether it's for overspeed or the resistance, obviously you work more on the short sprints, 1 and 2. How would you kind of describe the value of using 1080 motorized resistance assistance with a little bit longer event like a 400 meter?
So like I coached 400 meters. I coach 400 hurdlers. Um, I normally treat them as a sprinter. So my way of coaching is more into the sprint side instead of the endurance. And I coach them similar to like the 100 meter and 200 meter sprinters. The only difference is that I don't focus too much on the length of the drive phase. So, like they accelerate on the turn. I always want the first 10 meter to get basically straight. So they incline the blocks to attack it like, straight line. Over like 10 meter, 400 hurdler is normally going between the sixth and the seventh step. So is in between that because the seventh step is over the 10 meter. In a 400 meter guy, 400 meter lady is before, because normally like they not pushing that much, but I always want the first step to be straight. So when I use the 1080, I always like do the same, but I mostly focus on on the shape and the trunk on the first 10 meter, and then like they can already like start to stand up, and then is more like a work on resisted acceleration in terms of I always do this distinction. One thing is acceleration, biomechanics. One thing is acceleration in physics. Okay. Sometimes people say, oh, he accelerates till 85 meter. No, he did an acceleration till 85 meter because his split keeps getting low. So in physics, he kept accelerating, like basically the the variation of velocity over time kept improving till 85 meters. But the actual acceleration in biomechanics, sorry if I start to use the hand like an Italian, but like the actual acceleration as biomechanics stopped way earlier. It's impossible that it keeps a biomechanic acceleration till 85. It's a miracle if they keep it till 35 with elite men sprinters. No, we have elite men sprinters that accelerate so the drive phase and the transition last literally 20 meters. No, in a 400-meter guy, we use it to accelerate in terms of with the same resistance, we keep getting faster split till 30 meters. But on acceleration perspective in biomechanics, in the 400, I work the first 10, 15, while with elite sprinters, I work with 25, 30, 35. Okay, depending also on how tall they are, how long is the leg. So a lot of variable.